If you like our podcast, we think you'll love our Next Economy MBA. It's a 9-month learning journey for entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs, and aspiring change makers alike. Our MBA gives emerging leaders a new set of blueprints for creating life-serving, regenerative organizations. We explore topics like regenerative finance, cooperative models of ownership, alternative economics, and much more. You'll leave inspired by the stories of leading Next Economy organizations, and you'll be nourished by a community of mission-aligned peers. So we invite you to join our flourishing community of more than 275 alumni and growing. Visit lifteconomy.com/MBA to learn more. That's lifteconomy.com/MBA to learn more. Cohort 8, our newest cohort, starts on March 29th, 2022. Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
Welcome. My name is Erin Axelrod. I'm a partner at Lift Economy, and I am so pleased to be joined today by two amazing people behind the Agrarian Trust. I am joined today by Ian McSweeney, who has had a career and life work focused on the human connection to soil and food. He's worked as a social worker, founded a brokerage and consulting company to focus on prioritizing conservation, agriculture, and community. And most recently, he served as executive director of the Russell Foundation, where he worked with 60 land conservation groups, townships, local, state, and federal partners to move 60 farms and protect over 12,000 acres and raising $16 million, all aimed towards providing benefit to farmland, farmers, communities, and the local agrarian economy. And he is now the director at Agrarian Trust. Now, Eliza's work with Agrarian Trust is specifically focused on land-based livelihoods, healthy farms, decommodifying land, and legal tools for equitable land access and shared stewardship. Eliza Spelman Taylor lives in Southwest Virginia, where she cooperates a diversified farm in the Sinking Creek Valley called Singing Spring Farm, where she raises food, fiber, and medicine and specializes in raw milk goat cheeses. She's a farmer, acupuncturist, and Agrarian Trust team member, and her life centers on nurturing and healing with the land and human communities that depend on it, and especially focusing on healing the racialized harms and capitalism. She holds a bachelor's degree and a JD from Vermont Law School and a master's degree from the Zhengtao School of Classical Chinese Medicine. Thank you both so much for joining us to tell us about Agrarian Trust. We're so happy to have you.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. I'm excited for our talk.
So, could you tell us about how this idea of the Agrarian Trust started and a little bit about what is so incredibly important about the work you do?
Yeah, so Agrarian Trust started kind of brought together by a few organizations, Greenhorn's National Young Farmers Coalition, Schumacher Center, and others came together for discussions. And they realized and came to the conclusion that really a land trust that's focused on community land trust structures and has a priority on farmland and regenerative agriculture was needed. And there was a lack of capacity or other organizations holding that role. And there still is in many ways. We need 1,000 more organizations doing this work, but they came together to start the Agrarian Trust. The Agrarian Trust then kind of had a few years of developing as an organization and getting off the ground, and really was founded with 3 mission areas. One was to raise awareness for the transition of farmland that's underway, that upwards of 400 million acres is in transition right now in this country because of the demographics of landowners. And 2, to support stakeholders and communities So, developing networks, incubating projects, supporting initiatives all around that land transition and others who are doing this work and connected to the work and community. How can we support and be part of those stakeholder networks? And three and final really is to create this land holding structure. And so knowing that this type of land trust was needed was why the trust was formed. Knowing it was part of the work of creating the land trust structure, it had this 3-part mission. And the 3rd part mission we've now created into this agrarian commons model that we launched a year and a half ago now. And we'll talk more about it today, I'm sure.
And Eliza, as a farmer involved in this, do you have a personal story or calling that really compelled you to get into land decommodification and commons?
Yeah, I guess I just generally love connecting with people in relation with land and food. I'm drawn to gardening as a nexus between people and nature, and I deeply care about environmental health and human health, and a passion, I guess, for supporting our collective liberation through human relationships with each other, the land, and all beings. And I think agrarian commons is just inherently about relationships with communities, land, people, farmers, and how all of those move and support a healthy system. So
amazing. So share a little bit about, I think what's so critical for our listeners to understand is how the commons structure is unique and additive for this just food system that we're aspiring to create. Could you talk a little bit about the relationship between Agrarian Trust and Agrarian Commons?
Yeah, so we, Agrarian Trust as an organization, saw places and resources and ways that we could and should be involved, and also saw ways that and kind of decisions and where control, equity, and autonomy should sit as also holding a place in local communities. So, what we saw was the need to create a multi-entity structure that accounted for kind of what a national grassroots nonprofit can bring in supports and what a local community can bring in supports, and how they together can collaborate towards a shared goal. So the relationship between the commons and the trust is that the relation, that the commons are focused on the human relationship, the land holding, the human land relationship, where the trust is more focused on how can we bring network supports, knowledge, examples of learning and kind of modeling that we're doing elsewhere, and resources of different types forward to these commons.
Yeah, I think in a way it mimics nature in a sense that things don't stagnate in some centralized nonprofit way where, whether that's like wealth accumulation by a large national nonprofit, Agrarian Trust is moving money and supporting local communities, at where all of the land is held locally, assets are held locally, money moves from the nonprofit to local communities. And so there's very different than a centralized bureaucracy or something along those lines.
Yeah. So, and you launched in 10 strategic geographies. So could you talk a little bit about those different places that and the stories of some of the exciting land rematriation things that have happened so far?
Yeah, happy to. We, Eliza and I, and a few others, as we kind of developed this agrarian commons model, we developed the structure and the model with many others. And at the same time, we as a very small organization at the time were cultivating a number of relationships and projects. And those projects were, thoughts of and intentions around creating these community-centered agrarian commons. So we had different kind of long-standing relationships in some places, and, other areas, thoughts of kind of the types of community connection or collaborations that could come about to create these commons. And looking at all those, we had intention of trying to create a model, the Agrarian Commons, that has some shared values and structure and similarities, and also is unique to place, and its uniqueness from place to place is, led by local community and those involved, and also tells kind of stories of America and communities across the country that are so diverse and in present times are so polarized, and yet are connected to land and are connected to food and can resonate with this commons model. So how can we kind of use this model, the agrarian commons, that is fairly similar, and find communities that show the diversity of how and where this model can be helpful for land transitions and kind of fruitful for community engagement. And so, thought of and developed and launched the commons where we did. Since then are getting a lot of interest of people, wanting to from learn about what we're doing and kind of have questions of their own, to wanting to start or participate or support agrarian commons that exists, that we have a lot more kind of opportunities and needs now to also think about. So we continue to kind of strategically think about how do we tell, very impactful, rich, and important localized stories that are connected to national values and interconnected to one another in a way that shows this commons can work for farms at all different kind of ages of the farm business, for, farmers seeking land to land seeking farmers, that it's a fit in many ways depending upon the community needs.
Yeah, I think a big part of the vision in the diversity of the first cohort, I suppose, of commons and future commons is polycultural commons all over the U.S. with diverse partners and land trusts involved, supporting each other through, like mutual aid, mycelial networks. So a big question we're working from and always evolving is how to design agrarian commons, support other land commons, and grow supporters and allies in the same way we'd nurture a diversified farm or, a farm grounded in agroecology.
I was really excited with the one in Maine that launched. Can we get a snapshot of just a couple that are, so people can actually really witness and envision, okay, who are these people that are gaining access to land that they didn't have tenure over, before Agrarian Trust and Agrarian Commons came onto the stage?
Yeah, so a real kind of diversity, and it's not always about, who is gaining access. Some have access and continue that access in a new way, but really kind of what's transpired since the incorporation of these agrarian commons and the kind of exploration and development of other emerging initiatives is we've moved forward and kind of landed 4 commons with farm properties. And so thinking about those 4 and their rich stories, in Maine, there's the Somali Bantu community in the Lewiston, Auburn area. And we and almost 1,800 donors came together from around the country to raise money to acquire a 104-acre farm that they now have tenure on. They've added high tunnels, a processing and slaughter space that's halal certified. They have cold storage there. They're just fully farming on the land vegetables and goats presently, and expanding the acres in kind of cover crop and cultivation. And so that's a growing farm community there. And the Somali Bantus, were having a nonprofit farm organization that was land insecure for a number of years. So that commons addressed a land security and is now building land equity, and they're some of the food they're growing, they're developing markets for, they're expanding their other programmatic work and their community engagement in many ways. So that's, growing, and a wonderful example there. In Washington state, we had been donated some land from a non-farmer who envisioned the land being an active agriculture, but it was a hayfield, a former lavender farm years ago. But that land we've through partnership with Patagonia and others, we've invested in stewardship to build soil health and restore some NATO ecosystem that's there. And we've now just gone through an RFP process and selected a hopeful first next generation farmer to hold a secure long-term lease for that property. And so, stay tuned over the next month or two. We'll announce out who that is, but we're excited to kind of bring that land into relationship with the next generation and bring that land into active agriculture. In New Hampshire, we partnered with a community land trust that has long history of ties to the community land trust movement and the Schumacher Center and other early kind of European-led CSA farms. And they donated farm in and transferred farm into the New Hampshire Agrarian Commons. It's a mid-career regenerative livestock farm that provides local and regional proteins from wholesale to retail to on-farm and CSA pickup, and is building soil along this major river, the Merrimack River, in the state, less than 10 minutes from the airport in the largest city in New Hampshire. So that's kind of a different story of, who the farmers are connected and what the work is, but that's going on in New Hampshire. And then kind of the last most recent land project would be, we're involved in a rematriation project in Massachusetts that has been more of a direct relationship building project, but a significant fundraise as well. And we just on November 18th of this year acquired that property into this new ownership structure and are now beginning to have work days and develop lease and decision-making process and take the steps forward to improve and renovate the property and a few repairs needed to the homes there. But it's transitioning back to indigenous ownership after 386 years from which they were removed from that exact land. And it's a beautiful land. It has along a river, it has a 5-acre island. It's an active farm. It's got housing for many. So yeah, the future there and what will be is really exciting and inspiring, and stay tuned to hear more about that. And there's more work to come, but that's kind of a snapshot of what's been going on with the land projects.
Thank you so much for doing that work to, repair those relationships and those harms. I'm curious if you would talk a little bit about, kind of the elephant in the room of land ownership in this country, particularly along the racial wealth divides and the ownership divides, and how you hold that in the context of trying to repair that.
Would it make sense to share a little bit about the Central Virginia Agrarian Commons? This commons recently launched.
Yeah, and even just, I think some of our listeners might not even know that I think it's like 1% of land in this country, less than 1% is owned by African Americans, and, indigenous land tenure probably has some similar statistics. So
less than 2% of farmland is owned by people of color, and over 70% of farm workers are people of color.
Yeah.
So it's so grossly unjust that ownership and hoarding and who has ownership, who has tenure, who has equity in land, and who doesn't, and who's excluded from that. The reality is also, though, that same unjust system and the hoarding of assets is in this transition where 400 million acres of that asset is in transition this decade and next. So different than many other institutions and systems and problems we're faced in our society and across the globe, like this is a problem that's in a transition period now. So it's more, we have the opportunity and the responsibility and obligation as coming from and being part of the white landowning class to transition during this time of land transition into a more just ownership and equitable structure, because the change is happening daily. That, there's USDA noted from 2012 to 2017 that 37 mid-sized farms closed every single day. So every single day, 37 mid-sized farms were closing. Every year, over 30,000 acres is stolen still from Black farmers across this country, from land theft and heirs property rights and other schemes that steal land today, this year, from Black farmers. So, that transition is underway in many ways, right? So what are we going to do to step into this land transition and take concrete action to make permanent change?
Yeah, and our agrarian common model is actually, quite borrowed from new communities in Georgia, deeply rooted in the South and African American farmers. And I think that really resonates too with the Central Virginia Agrarian Commons, which is a Black-led commons that has an interest in both rural land and urban land and is taking in a donation outside of Richmond, the former capital of the Confederacy in Virginia, a land donation from a white couple that are really interested in having Black and Indigenous people of color centered in agriculture on the land and building equity on the land and stewarding the land exclusively. So I think, too, the agrarian commons can really offer a complementary model where reparations is maybe a real power shift, but a lot of communities are really interested in not mimicking the same, white settler personal property model that we've had in this country since its beginning, but instead creating a new way of decommodifying land and holding land in community. And that's really attractive to people who don't want to replicate the harms that have been done through commodifying the whole world, people and land.
That was an amazing story you just shared, Eliza. And I'm curious, what is next for Agrarian Trust? Like, how do these commons grow? Are you receiving lots of interest in people donating land? What's next for Agrarian Trust and Agrarian Commons?
So a combination of things. We're seeing a huge amount of interest of people wanting to engage in different ways. Some of that is their land project a good fit? And some of those are donations. Some of those want to sell or transfer, in some termed agreement. But there's a generally more kind of interest coming towards us right now than we have capacity for. So part is, we're doing some internal work now. We've been growing considerably from very small organization just a few years ago with a few of us to now 11 and growing. So, the need to look, focus, and attend inward is also part of what's next for us. But for the Agrarian Commons, we have exciting work coming in Virginia this year. We have exciting work in other Agrarian Commons to stay tuned for. But the other piece is that it's land, it's access to capital, it's also knowledge and access to and participation in these systems that hold land and hold capital and hold knowledge of such, whether it be legal or land trust or conservation or other. So how do we support and build capacity and share awareness for that? So we've been developing and have recently, 2 new people have joined the team and will be launching in the coming year a Commons Alliance, and a Commons Alliance being kind of in majority, an outward facing kind of support and network connection and resource to help share knowledge and help share our learning and what we're inspired by and what we're creating for others to learn from, pick apart, critique, evolve into their own structure. That, how can we share the knowledge of kind of the structure we've created, the knowledge of how we can fundraise and, as I mentioned in Maine, raise money from people across the world, from 1,800 donors to this repatriation project where we're closing in on $2 million in a few short months. So, how can we share the process we do with others, and how can we support and learn from and evolve through the process others take? So how do we get in, deeper relationship with each other and this land transition process? And that'll be a lot of the work of this Commons Alliance that's coming forward. And it's more to connect with and help building the field in general of knowledge share and other organizations' work and capacity, and how we might interconnect with and work with them in many ways. Because, our goal of growing these commons is one farm at a time, and even donations require money for the transaction and a stewardship endowment we set up and investments we may need to make in buildings or land or other. So it's a process of relationships and land transition for us that takes time, and each one is important to focus in that way. So that's part of our work, but that's only going to be at most, little inspirations across the country of these commons. But how can we connect and engage with many others too?
Yeah, we're experimenting, and this is just the beginning, and we need to document and share our work with others and encourage and support all kinds of shared land stewardship projects. We need, like Ian said earlier, thousands of these.
Thanks for that. And it occurs to me that something that I've found really compelling and interesting about the model is how it addresses what we call in our MBA program the price parity paradox, how food growers in this country, when they get into interfacing with the economic system and they're trying to grow food and deliver it to market, the economics, the way our food system economics work, really forces farmers oftentimes to compromise. And so I'm curious if you could share a little bit about how having farmers have 99-year leases or some form of stable land tenure can facilitate them in doing more practices that are good for people and planet and good for communities, rather than kind of what we see farmers being kind of trapped in this system that forces them to make other decisions.
Yeah, I suppose first the commons, takes the mortgage that might be based on the market value of land or the development value of land out of the question or the equation for a farmer to calculate and what's possible. And a lot, because Agrarian Trust is a nonprofit and can move money into Agrarian Commons, and Agrarian Commons themselves can also fundraise for projects, things like planting an orchard or an agroforestry system, or things that might take years to develop, that a farmer that has a bottom line or needs to earn an income from season one wouldn't necessarily be able to afford or have the time to afford. And so, a model where that we're leveraging capital to move into land itself and into communities to layer into or intersect with a farm business is really important.
Amazing. Thanks for helping our listeners kind of understand that correlation. Do you have anything to add, Ian? Yeah.
We'll see too, right? Because this is so new for us. So we're taking in farms now, and some are just bringing on next farmer and businesses starting. Others are mid-career business, but we don't have the answers. So we're not going to for decades out, right? Hopefully. We need to be okay with that. We need to be okay with that in our culture and kind of take these bold steps to step forward with intention. I think part of it too is the shift in mindset. Like the reality is now farmland is owned by people who are on average 64 or older. So the time horizon for that ownership before a transition takes place is short term. And we have all this 400 million acres in transition. Like the farmland is a, faster and faster trading commodity, unfortunately. We need to think about farmland in a different relationship and a different value system. And so hopefully, we won't know for several decades or more, but hopefully a nonprofit ownership structure that decommodifies the land and a 99-year lease that frees the farmer up from that debt burden, but also gives security and ability to build equity and lays out some shared stewardship and management of that land. Like, hopefully that does make a difference and it changes perspective enough that people, will invest and will steward and kind of practice agriculture on land in ways that regenerates the earth in so many ways that are needed, but we won't know for several decades or more. But, we know the direction we're going in over the next few decades, and we really need to do all we can to try to create and manifest alternatives.
Yeah, because certainly what's happening right now is not working, right? Bill Gates buying up all the farmland and being this sole decision maker over it is maybe not the best way to have more shared resource in this world.
Yeah, the commons are really like creating spaces within a world that we can't, or a system that we can't fully step out of. But hopefully there's spaces that include all these diverse worlds that we really want to live in, and ultimately they can expand and create even more possibilities. Maybe that's a theory of change for Agrarian Trust, or one of our theories of change.
Yeah, it reminds me of that quote from the Zapatista movement, of like the world within worlds, a world of many worlds. I love that. So in our last few moments here, how can our listeners both support Agrarian Trust and Agrarian Commons, and also just develop more literacy and competencies to talk about some of these entrenched issues that are kind of like below the surface? They're not so much how most people talk about the problems of our worlds, but they're so, your analysis of what we need to do to change the systems is so important.
Well, yeah, go to our website, agrariantrust.org, go to the Learn tab, the Agrarian Commons or the Commons Alliance tabs. All are a wealth of information on kind of different aspects of our work and partners' work and resources available. There's also a calendar there on the website that shares other presentations that we're doing and workshops, so you can follow us elsewhere. Some of that Commons Alliance work is regional workshops around land transfer, land ownership, land tenure, land relationship structures that we're partnering with other organizations. In the Northeast, we partnered with Northeast Farmers of Color, had a workshop series where several hundred attendees came to watch, online, making it very accessible to many. So, tune in and see where we're giving other presentations. But then we're a nonprofit organization who needs to raise philanthropic capital to operate. We're also bringing forward this model, which is focused on transitioning farmland from the commoditized marketplace into a community-centered commons. So that takes considerable money from, an acquisition of land and the project costs and investment needs, to landowners who are willing and able and hold vision and donate land, still needs those other project investment costs. So, the need for philanthropic capital of all types to make these land transitions locally in communities across the country is really where the majority of our needs are and will continue to be for the years ahead. And, encourage you to also think about, any other, and especially BIPOC-led land trusts and kind of land owning communities, that it's the same challenge they face. Is land transitions and acquisitions have a considerable cost, and they're excluded from these systems of capital and the networks of accessing capital many times. So, support us, but please look for other organizations that are BIPOC-led and support them, and understand the costs of land transitions and support them in meaningful ways to make those land transitions possible.
Amazing. Well said. So this holiday, donate to your local BIPOC-led land trust and land, folks, and think of Agrarian Trust as well.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. And then just like any other resources, where are you looking to get your information about what's happening in farmland? Like when you're looking outside of Agrarian Trust, like whose blogs are you reading or things like that?
Well, on one level, I'm not at all. And I'm getting such a rich knowledge base and experience. Like we're working in 11 states, localized to, individual farms and these communities connected to them around the country. And each one is so diverse. So just to be part of those board meetings and part of the meetings and kind of dive into and learn from the realities and local communities across the country is such an inspirational gift.
Land collectives like Earthseed and others throughout the country that are really modeling new ways of collectively stewarding land are really inspiring too. But definitely, like Ian said, the people and places we're working with are the ultimate.
Thank you so much. We're going to close now, and I so appreciate your work. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.